You are standing in darkness. The stone beneath your bare feet is cold, the kind of cold that climbs through your ankles and settles in your bones. The air tastes of smoke and yesterday's roasted meat and something older, something baked into the walls themselves after decades of fire and grease and sweat. You cannot see the ceiling, but you can feel the room. It is vast. The heat from a dying hearth reaches your left side in faint, uneven waves, while the draft from the corridor behind you pushes cold air against the back of your neck. Somewhere ahead, in the deepest shadow, a cauldron hangs from an iron chain, still warm, still holding the remains of a stew that has not been emptied in weeks, perhaps months. Beneath a dome of clay beside the great hearth, a device called the couvre-feu, the fire cover. Yesterday's embers are glowing, a faint pulse of orange light, no brighter than a single candle, just enough to keep the fire alive through the night, just enough to see the shapes on the floor around you. They are people, a dozen of them, maybe more, curled on straw pallets and rough woolen blankets pressed together for warmth on the cold stone. A scullion with his face still streaked with ash, a baker's boy with flour worked into the creases of his knuckles, and nearest to the dying hearth, an 8-year-old boy. His small hands are wrapped in strips of linen, bandages, covering the burns he earned yesterday from the spitting fat of a roasting spit he turned for 12 hours straight. He will be the first one woken. He is always the first one woken. Because in a medieval castle kitchen, the fire must never go out. And from this simple act, this nightly ritual of covering the fire and uncovering it again before dawn, came a word that has traveled 800 years from this room to ours. Curfew. Welcome back to our cozy corner of history. Before we begin tonight's journey, I want you to settle in. Adjust your pillow. Let the blanket find that comfortable weight across your shoulders. If there's a light still on nearby, you might consider dimming it, because where we are going tonight is lit only by fire, and it has been that way for centuries. We are stepping into a room that most history books never bothered to describe. Not the throne room, not the battlefield, not the great hall with its tapestries and carved oak chairs. We are going into the one place that every person in the castle depended upon, the one room that never truly rested, and yet the one room that history almost completely forgot. The medieval castle kitchen. 300 people fed from this single room every day. No refrigeration, no running water, no recipes written in any language most of the cooks could read. Just fire and iron and muscle, and a hierarchy as rigid and unforgiving as anything in the courts above. The head cook, a man of considerable authority, sometimes more powerful than the steward himself, commanded this room like a general commands a battlefield, and his stakes were just as high. A perfectly roasted haunch of venison could earn him the Lord's favor for a season. A single spoiled fish could land him in the dungeon. Served to the wrong noble on the wrong night, it could be called something far worse than carelessness. It could be called poison. And in the medieval world, that accusation did not end well. But the head cook was only the top of a pyramid that stretched down through specialist roasters and saucers, through bakers and brewers and butchers, all the way to the bottom, to the spit boys and scullions and kitchen knaves, whose names were never recorded and whose job titles would eventually become insults.
To call a man a scullion or a knave in medieval England was to call him the lowest thing you could imagine. Shakespeare himself reached for these words when he wanted to wound a character. "Away, you scullion, you rampillion, you fustularian." These were the people who fed the castle. And tonight we are going to walk through their entire day, from the moment the couvre-feu is lifted in the cold darkness before dawn, through the brutal chaos of the midday feast, to the last pot scrubbed and the last ember banked long after the rest of the castle has fallen silent. We will stand in a fireplace large enough to walk inside. We will watch children turn iron spits over open flames until their arms shake. We will follow the journey of a single grain of pepper worth more than its weight in silver from a merchant ship in Venice, over the Alpine passes, down the river barges of France, and into a locked room in this very castle that only one man was trusted to open. And when the day is over, when the last candle gutters out and the kitchen falls quiet, we will sit with these servants as they collapse onto their straw pallets beside the dying hearth. The same fire that exhausted them all day long is the very thing that keeps them alive through the night. This is one ordinary day, the kind of day that happened hundreds of times a year and that nobody at the time thought was worth recording. Until now. So let us begin where every day in this kitchen begins. Not with the crash of pots or the shouting of orders. Not yet. That will come later. Let us begin in the quietest moment, the only peaceful hour this room will know. 3 o'clock in the morning. The castle is silent. The great hall is empty. And somewhere below, beneath a dome of clay, the embers are waiting.
The kitchen at 3 in the morning is a different creature entirely from the kitchen you will see at noon. At noon, this room will be deafening, iron striking iron, fat hissing against open flame, the head cook's voice cutting through walls of smoke and steam, barking orders that carry the weight of a man who knows with absolute certainty that a single mistake today could end his career, his freedom, or his life. But that is hours away. Right now, the kitchen is holding its breath. The great hearth, a fireplace so enormous that 3 grown men could stand inside it shoulder to shoulder without stooping, is dark, or nearly dark. Beneath the couvre-feu, that dome of fired clay we spoke of moments ago, a bed of embers pulses with a faint, unsteady glow, orange dimming to gray, gray brightening to orange. A slow, patient rhythm, like the breathing of something ancient and half asleep. This is the most important object in the entire kitchen. Not the great iron cauldron hanging from its chain, not the long-handled baking peels leaning against the wall, not the locked door to the spicery or the rows of steel knives racked above the preparation table, the couvre-feu, the fire cover. Because everything in this castle, every meal, every loaf of bread, every cup of warmed wine sent to the Lord's chamber, every pot of boiling water, every candle lit from a kitchen taper begins here, beneath this dome of clay, with these embers. If the fire goes out, the entire morning schedule collapses. Relighting a hearth from cold flint and steel is not the work of a moment. It is the work of 20 minutes, sometimes 30, of striking and blowing and coaxing a reluctant spark into tinder, then kindling, then flame. 30 minutes in a medieval kitchen morning is a disaster. 30 minutes means bread is late. Bread late means breakfast is late. Breakfast late means the Lord's steward is standing in the kitchen doorway with a face like thunder, asking questions that nobody wants to answer. And so the fire is never allowed to die. Every night,
After the last pot is scrubbed and the last candle in the great hall gutters out, the most senior cook on duty performs the same ritual. He rakes the embers into a tight mound at the center of the hearth. He places the couvre-feu, heavy, dome-shaped, roughly the size of a large basin, carefully over the mound, leaving a narrow gap at the base for air. Just enough oxygen to keep the embers alive, not enough to let them flare into open flame while the kitchen sleeps. It is a balance learned through years of practice. Too tight and the embers suffocate by morning. Too loose and a stray spark catches the straw on the floor, the grease on the walls, the wooden rafters overhead, and the kitchen burns. This is why so many castle kitchens were built as separate structures, standing alone in the bailey, rather than connected to the main keep. Not for convenience, not for the smell, for survival. A castle kitchen fire was not a question of if, but when. And when it came, the best you could hope for was that the flames took only the kitchen and not the rest of the castle with it. The couvre-feu was the nightly prayer against that fate. The first person to move is not a servant. He is the head cook, and he does not need to be woken because he has not truly been asleep, not fully, not the way the spit boys sleep, that heavy, dreamless collapse of total exhaustion. The head cook sleeps the way a captain sleeps on the eve of battle, lightly, with one ear turned toward the room, aware of every shift in sound and temperature. He has a slightly better sleeping spot than the others, a straw pallet in a shallow alcove near the far wall, where the stone holds a trace of warmth from the bread ovens on the other side, a woolen blanket not shared, a small wooden chest beside him containing his personal belongings, a change of linen, a bone-handled knife, and a tattered book of recipes written in a hand he can barely read but has memorized through years of repetition. He is perhaps 40 years old, though he looks older. His forearms are mottled with scars, pale, shiny patches where burns healed badly years ago. His hands are thick and calloused, the knuckles swollen and stiff from decades of gripping iron handles in extreme heat. His lungs carry the permanent rasp of a man who has breathed wood smoke every day since he was a boy. He began in this kitchen, or one very like it, as a spit boy. He was 7. He is one of the few who survived long enough and proved skilled enough to rise through every rank of the kitchen hierarchy. Spit boy, scullion, knave, assistant to the roast cook, sorcerer's apprentice, second cook, and finally, after the old head cook died of a fever one winter, the position he holds now. Head cook, master of the kitchen, the man who feeds the castle. It is a title that carries more weight than most people outside these walls would ever understand. The head cook manages a budget that rivals a wealthy merchant's. He negotiates with suppliers, farmers, fishermen, spice traders, wine merchants, and he does so shrewdly, because every penny overspent is a penny the Lord's steward will question. He plans menus days in advance, adjusting for fast days and feast days, for the seasons, for the availability of game, for the unpredictable arrival of guests who must be fed lavishly at a moment's notice. He holds the only key to the spicery, that locked chamber where saffron and pepper and cinnamon are stored with the same care a lord would give to his gold. And he carries a burden that none of the servants beneath him fully appreciate. If a dish fails, the blame falls on him alone.
not on the spit boy who let the roast char, not on the saucerer who overseasoned the broth, on him. And the consequences of failure in a medieval kitchen are not a reprimand or a poor review. If the Lord is embarrassed before his guests by a badly prepared meal, the cook can be dismissed without notice, thrown from the castle gates with nothing but the clothes he wears. If a dish causes illness, real or imagined, the accusation shifts from incompetence to something darker: sabotage, treachery, poison. In the courts of medieval Europe, cooks were occasionally tried for attempted murder on the strength of nothing more than a nobleman's stomachache. The head cook knows this. He has always known this. It is the invisible weight he carries from the moment the couvre-feu is lifted each morning to the moment it is placed back over the embers each night. He rises now, slowly. His joints protest, his knees especially, stiffened by the cold and by years of standing on stone floors for 18 hours a day. He pulls his tunic straight. He slides his feet into leather shoes that have molded to the shape of his arches over years of use. He does not light a candle. He does not need one. He has made this walk 10,000 times. 6 steps from his pallet to the hearth. He kneels. His hands find the couvre-feu in the darkness, the familiar curve of fired clay, warm to the touch even now. He grips the edges, lifts it, sets it aside on the hearthstone with a care that speaks of long practice. The sound it makes, a soft, hollow scrape of clay on stone, is the first real sound of the new day. And there they are, the embers, still alive, a constellation of orange and white and gray, pulsing gently in the sudden rush of cool air. He leans close, studies them the way a physician studies a patient, reading their color, their heat, their distribution. Are they even? Are there dead spots? Has the mound collapsed overnight? Satisfied, he reaches for the iron poker resting against the hearthstone. He rakes the embers outward, spreading them into a wider bed. Then the kindling, thin strips of dry oak, split yesterday afternoon and stacked beside the hearth for exactly this purpose. He lays them across the embers in a careful lattice. Not too tight, air must circulate. He leans forward, blows, a long, steady breath, not too hard, not too gentle. The embers brighten, a wisp of smoke rises from the kindling. Another breath, another, and then, quietly, almost reluctantly, the first small tongue of flame appears. It catches the edge of an oak strip, curls around it, spreads to the next. Within 30 seconds, the lattice is burning, and the darkness in the great hearth retreats just slightly. The head cook's face is lit from below. The scars on his forearms, the deep lines around his eyes, the set expression of a man performing a ritual he has performed every morning for 20 years. He does not smile. There is nothing to smile about. This is simply the beginning. He adds larger pieces now, split logs of beech and ash, good hardwoods that burn long and hot, essential for the spit roasting that will consume most of the morning. The fire grows. The sound changes from the tentative crackle of kindling to the deeper, steadier roar of a hearth finding its full voice.
The warmth expands outward across the stone floor like a slow tide. It reaches the nearest sleeper, the spit boy, still curled in his linen wraps, and the boy shifts slightly, instinctively pressing closer to the growing heat without waking. The head cook watches him for a moment, just a moment. His expression does not change.
Then he turns to the great iron cauldron hanging from its crane above the hearth. He swings it inward over the growing flames. The liquid inside, yesterday's stew, the perpetual broth that has not been emptied in weeks, begins to warm. A faint curl of steam rises from its dark surface. Within the hour, fresh water and new ingredients will be added, and the cycle will continue, layer upon layer, day upon day, a stew with no beginning and no end. The kitchen is waking. But the head cook does not wake the others, not yet. There is a brief window, 10 minutes, perhaps 15, between the lighting of the fire and the rousing of the staff, a sliver of solitude in a day that will offer none. He uses it the same way every morning, standing before the growing fire, hands extended toward the heat, running through the day's menu in his mind. What meat is in the larder? How much bread the baker will need? Whether the fish pond has been restocked? Whether today is a fast day, and if so, how to make a meatless dinner worthy of a lord's table? Whether there are guests expected? Whether the steward has sent word of any changes? He holds all of it, every ingredient, every timing, every risk, in a mind that has never been formally educated, but that operates with the precision of a master strategist. The fire pops, a log settles, sparks spiral upward toward the blackened vent in the ceiling. The head cook lowers his hands. It is time.
He turns toward the sleeping figures on the floor. His gaze moves across them, the scullion, the baker's boy, the kitchen knaves huddled under shared cloaks, and the spit boy still sleeping by the hearth, small and still beneath his woolen wrap. The head cook does not shout. That is not how this kitchen wakes. There will be shouting later, when the dinner hour bears down and every second counts, and a dropped platter could mean catastrophe. But not now. Now he crosses the room to the most senior of his assistants, the roast cook, and places a firm hand on the man's shoulder. A squeeze, a shake, nothing more. The roast cook's eyes open. He does not ask what time it is. He already knows. The day has begun. The fires are lit, the cauldron is warming, but the hardest part of this morning has not started yet, because outside, in the frozen darkness of the bailey, the animals are still alive. The roast cook is on his feet now. He moves without speaking, pulling his leather apron from the hook on the wall, tying it across his chest with the automatic efficiency of a soldier strapping on armor. His eyes are not yet fully open, but his hands already know what to do. They have known for years. He crosses the kitchen to the row of iron spits resting against the far wall. Each one is as long as a man is tall and nearly as heavy. Solid iron rods with forked ends for holding carcasses in place over the fire. He selects 2 and carries them to the hearth, setting them into the iron cradles that straddle the fireplace. The metal rings against stone, a clear, sharp sound that echoes briefly through the vaulted ceiling. On the floor beside the hearth, the spit boy flinches at the noise. His eyes stay closed. His body curls tighter beneath the woolen wrap, fingers pulling the cloth instinctively over his ears. A child's reflex. A few more seconds of warmth. A few more seconds of stillness before the world demands everything he has.
The roast cook looks down at him. There is no cruelty in his expression, but there is no softness either. This is simply how it works. This is how it has always worked. He crouches beside the boy and places a hand, heavy,
rough, not unkind, on the child's shoulder. One shake. The boy's eyes open. He does not stretch or yawn or ask for 5 more minutes. Those instincts were trained out of him within his first week in this kitchen. He sits up, pushes the woolen wrap aside. The cold hits him immediately. Despite the growing fire, the stone floor radiates a deep, stubborn chill that the flames will not fully conquer until mid-morning. He pulls his rough linen shirt down over his thin frame and reaches for his shoes. They are too large for him, handed down from a kitchen knave who outgrew them, and he has stuffed the toes with straw to make them fit. His hands, even in the low firelight you can see them. The linen wraps from yesterday are gray with ash and grease. Beneath them the skin is tight and shiny, patches of healed burns layered over older burns, the landscape of a boy who has spent every working day of his short life inches from open flame. He does not unwrap them. He will not unwrap them until the head cook's wife, one of the few women permitted in the kitchen, changes the dressings later in the morning, if there is time. Often there is not. He stands. He is small for his age. Most spit boys are. The diet of kitchen scraps and coarse bread keeps them alive, but rarely helps them grow. He crosses to the hearth, where the roast cook has already positioned the first spit, and he takes his place at the turning handle. His right hand closes around the iron, his left braces against the wall for leverage. He will stand here, turning this handle, for the next 12 hours. Across the kitchen, 2 kitchen knaves, boys of perhaps 12 or 13, have been roused by the roast cook's second in command. Their task is the one that every kitchen servant dreads in the winter months: the well. They take up the wooden yoke, a curved beam designed to rest across the shoulders with an iron bucket hanging from each end, and push through the heavy kitchen door into the bailey. The cold outside is immediate and absolute. It is a different kind of cold from the kitchen floor. This is the open, wind-driven cold of an English pre-dawn in late autumn, and it finds every gap in their clothing within seconds. The well is 60 paces from the kitchen door. They walk in silence, their shoes crunching on frozen mud, their breath coming in pale clouds that dissolve into the darkness above them. The castle walls rise on either side, massive, featureless shadows against a sky that holds no trace of light. Somewhere above, a watchman is walking the battlements. They can hear the faint scuff of his boots on stone, the occasional clink of his lantern chain. He does not acknowledge them. They do not expect him to. The well rope is stiff with frost. The first boy wraps his hands around it and pulls, and the fibers bite into his palms like tiny needles of ice. The bucket descends into darkness, a distant splash. Then the weight of it, 25 pounds of water pulling against his arms as he hauls it back up, hand over hand, his shoulders burning with the effort. They will make this trip 7 times before the kitchen has enough water for the morning. 7 trips, 60 paces each way, nearly 1,000 paces walked in freezing darkness before the sun has even considered rising. And by the time they return with the final load, their hands will be so numb that they will stand beside the hearth for several minutes, flexing their fingers over the flames, waiting for the pain that comes when feeling returns, a sharp, prickling ache that is paradoxically a relief, because pain means the blood is flowing again. pain means no frostbite. Pain means their fingers will still work when the real labor begins. The water is poured into the great cauldron, into the washing basins, into the stone trough where vegetables will be scrubbed later in the morning, and the largest portion is carried through the narrow corridor to the bakehouse, because the baker has been awake even longer than the head cook, and he needs water now. The bakehouse sits adjacent to the main kitchen, connected by a low stone passageway that is permanently warm and permanently dusted with a fine layer of flour. The baker, a quiet, meticulous man whose forearms are pale with powder and whose eyebrows have been singed to near invisibility by years of leaning into the oven's mouth, has been working since 2 o'clock. His process began hours ago in the deep silence of the night. The dough was mixed before midnight, flour, water, yeast, and salt, kneaded on a broad wooden table scarred by decades of use. It was left to rise in large wooden troughs covered with linen cloths, placed near enough to the oven's residual warmth to encourage the yeast, but far enough to prevent a premature crust from forming. This is knowledge passed down through apprenticeships, not written in any book, but carried in the hands, in the timing, in the instinct for when the dough has doubled and when it has not.
Now, at 3:30, the baker slides his long wooden peel, a flat paddle on a handle nearly 6 feet long, beneath the first round of risen dough, and transfers it into the oven. The heat inside is extraordinary. The stone walls of the oven have been absorbing the warmth of a fire that burned for hours before the coals were raked out, and now they radiate that stored energy evenly from every surface. The bread does not cook from below, as in a modern oven. It cooks from everywhere at once, surrounded by heat, embraced by it. The first loaves will emerge in 40 minutes, and they will not all be the same. The finest flour, white, sifted, expensive, produces manchet, small, round, soft loaves destined for the Lord's table and the tables of his most honored guests. This is bread as luxury, bread as status. A lord's manchet is as much a symbol of his wealth as the tapestries on his walls or the silver on his table. Below manchet comes maslin, a mixed flour of wheat and rye, coarser in texture, darker in color. This is the bread of the upper servants, the steward, the marshal, the ladies' attendants. And at the bottom, the bread that the kitchen staff themselves will eat is the heaviest, darkest loaf, made from barley flour, sometimes oat, sometimes a mixture of whatever grain is cheapest and most abundant. It is dense, it is gritty, it has a flavor that is more earth than wheat. And when it comes out of the oven, the bottom crust, the side that rested directly on the oven floor, is blackened with ash and charred residue. The servants eat this part, the bottom, the burned, the blackened, the discarded. The nobles eat the top, the clean side, the golden, unblemished crown of the loaf. And from this small daily act of separation, repeated in every castle, every manor house, every great household in medieval England, came a phrase that would outlast the castles themselves: the upper crust. Back in the main kitchen, the transformation is nearly complete. What was a dark, silent room 30 minutes ago is now a workspace in full motion. The great hearth holds a strong, steady blaze. The cauldron is steaming. 2 spits are mounted in their cradles, waiting for the first carcasses. The water basins are filled.
Tallow candles, thick, uneven, smelling faintly of animal fat, have been lit along the preparation tables, casting a warm, flickering light across stone walls that glisten with condensation and old grease. The kitchen servants move around each other with the practiced choreography of people who share a small space every day of their lives. They do not bump, they do not collide. They pass in silence, stepping around the scullion hauling a bucket, ducking beneath the iron hooks where yesterday's herbs still hang drying, turning sideways in the narrow passage to the pantry as the baker's boy carries a tray of raw dough in the other direction. The head cook stands at the center of it all. He has not raised his voice once. He will not need to, not yet. The morning routine runs on its own momentum, each person performing tasks they have performed 1,000 times before. His role right now is to observe, to count, to ensure that every element is in place before the real work begins. He checks the fire. He checks the cauldron. He opens the larder door and examines what the huntsman delivered yesterday evening. 2 rabbits, a brace of pigeons, a partial haunch of venison, already beginning to turn at the edges. Not ideal. It will need to be cooked today or lost entirely. He closes the door, makes a decision. The venison goes on the spit first. He turns toward the spit boy. The child is already in position, both hands on the turning handle, his bandaged fingers curled around the cold iron, waiting. The head cook nods. The boy begins to turn. The fires are lit, the water is drawn, the bread is in the ovens, and the spit is turning. But the hardest part of this morning has not started yet, because outside, in the cold half-light of the bailey, the animals are still alive.
The first gray light has not yet reached the horizon, but you can feel it coming. There is a change in the quality of the darkness outside the kitchen door, a softening, a thinning, as if the sky is slowly remembering what color it is supposed to be. The watchman on the battlements has extinguished his lantern. The castle is stirring. And in the bailey, the open courtyard between the inner and outer walls, the animals know something is wrong. They have been penned here overnight. Sheep in a wattle enclosure near the north wall, a pig in a low wooden stall, its snout pressed against the gate. Chickens roosting in a lean-to beside the stable, their feathers ruffled against the cold. A pair of geese, gray and indignant, honking at the approaching footsteps of a man they have learned to fear. The butcher. He is not part of the kitchen staff, not exactly. He exists in a space between the kitchen and the wider castle household, answering to the head cook for what is needed, but operating with his own tools, his own schedule, his own grim expertise. He is a broad man with thick forearms and a leather apron stained so deeply with old blood that it has turned the color of dark wine. He carries a short-handled axe in one hand and a long knife in the other, and he walks toward the pens with the unhurried gait of a man who has done this so many times that it no longer occupies his thoughts. The killing is quick. It must be. Not from compassion, though perhaps some small trace of that remains after years of practice, but from practicality. A stressed animal produces tough meat. A cleanly killed animal bleeds properly, and proper bleeding is essential for preservation and flavor. The butcher knows this the way the baker knows his dough, and the sorcerer knows his spices. It is craft. The sounds carry across the bailey and through the open kitchen door. The kitchen servants do not look up. The spit boy does not flinch. This is the texture of every morning, as familiar and unremarkable as the crowing of the rooster or the scrape of the well bucket. Within 20 minutes, 2 sheep and the pig have been killed, bled, and hung from iron hooks on a wooden frame in the yard. The butcher works with a practiced efficiency that is, in its own way, elegant. his knife following the contours of muscle and bone with the confidence of a man who could do this blindfolded. The carcasses are opened, the organs separated, heart, liver, kidneys set aside for specific dishes, intestines cleaned for sausage casings, blood collected in a wooden bowl for black pudding. Nothing is wasted. In a medieval castle kitchen, waste is not merely frowned upon, it is a sin against the household economy, and the head cook will answer for every ounce of food that is not used. The butchered meat is carried into the kitchen on broad wooden trays. The smell enters with it, raw, iron-rich, unmistakable. It mingles with the smoke and the warming broth in the cauldron and the first loaves of bread now cooling on the bakehouse shelf, and together they create the scent that defines this room. Not pleasant, not unpleasant, simply real. The smell of sustenance being wrested from the raw materials of the natural world by nothing more than fire and blade and human effort.
By 5 o'clock, the full kitchen staff has assembled, and the room that held a dozen sleeping bodies 2 hours ago now holds nearly 30 people in constant, purposeful motion. This is the moment to understand the hierarchy, because in a medieval kitchen, hierarchy is everything. It determines where you stand, what you touch, what you eat, and how close to the fire you are permitted to sleep. It is as rigid as the feudal system above stairs, and in some ways more brutally enforced, because the consequences of a broken chain of command in this room are not abstract questions of honor or precedent. They are burned meat, ruined sauces, a lord's table left waiting, and the head cook's fury, which is by universal agreement a thing best avoided. At the top stands the head cook himself. You have already met him. He commands the room from its center, positioned where he can see every station, every fire, every pair of hands. He gives orders. He tastes. He adjusts. He is the only person in this kitchen who speaks directly to the steward, and through the steward to the Lord himself. His word within these walls is final. Directly beneath him, and nearest to the great hearth, stands the roast cook. If the head cook is the general, the roast cook is his most trusted lieutenant. He is responsible for the most visible, most prestigious element of any medieval meal, the roasted meat. A perfectly turned joint of venison, its skin golden and crackling, its interior pink and yielding. This is the centerpiece of the Lord's table, the dish that every guest will judge first and remember longest. The roast cook carries this responsibility with a quiet, focused intensity that borders on obsession. He is a lean man, taller than most in the kitchen, with arms that are roped with sinew from years of lifting heavy spits and maneuvering iron cradles over open flame. His face is permanently flushed, a deep weathered red from decades of standing in front of fires hot enough to sear meat at arm's length. His eyebrows, like the baker's, have been reduced to thin, pale suggestions of what they once were. He communicates with the spit boy almost entirely through gesture. A nod means faster, a raised palm means hold, a sharp snap of the fingers means the spit is uneven and the boy must adjust his angle immediately. He does not explain. He does not repeat. The spit boy learns, or the spit boy is replaced. This morning, the roast cook examines the venison haunch that the head cook has designated for the spit. He presses his thumb into the flesh, testing its firmness. He lifts it to his nose and inhales, checking for the first faint sourness of turning meat. It is on the edge. Another day and it would be lost. But today, roasted properly, seasoned well, it will be magnificent. He nods to himself.
begins threading it onto the iron rod with the careful precision of a craftsman mounting a precious object. In the far corner of the kitchen, as far from the fire's chaos as the walls will allow, a different kind of work is underway. The sorcerer stands at a heavy oak table, and before him sits an object that looks almost absurdly simple for the importance it holds: a stone mortar, carved from a single block of gray granite, so large and dense that it takes 2 men to move it. The pestle is nearly the length of his forearm, and into this ancient vessel he is grinding the most expensive ingredients in the entire castle. Saffron, threads of it, deep red and impossibly fragile, each one plucked by hand from the heart of a crocus flower in a distant field. It takes 70,000 flowers to produce a single pound of saffron. The head cook measures it out himself, personally, carefully, locking the spicery door behind him when he is finished. Ginger root, dried and hard as wood, imported from lands so far east that the merchants who carry it speak languages no one in this castle has ever heard. Black pepper, those small, dark spheres worth more per ounce than the silver coins in the Lord's strongbox. And cinnamon, the dried bark of a tree that grows on an island in the Indian Ocean, a place that exists for these kitchen workers only as a word, a rumor, a story told by a trader who probably heard it from another trader who had never been there either. The sorcerer grinds these spices with a reference that the other kitchen workers do not share and cannot fully understand. To the spit boy, spices are an abstraction, a locked door, and a pleasant smell. To the scullions, they are irrelevant. To the roast cook, spices are the head cook's concern, not his. But the sorcerer knows what the head cook knows. He knows that these tiny fragments of bark and seed and dried flour have traveled thousands of miles to reach this table. From the plantations of Ceylon and the Malabar coast, by ship across the Indian Ocean, through the hands of Arab merchants at the great trading ports of Alexandria and Constantinople, overland by caravan to the markets of Venice, then northward, by mule over the Alpine passes, by barge down the rivers of France, by cart along the muddy roads of England, until finally, they arrive here, in this stone mortar, in this smoke-filled kitchen, on this cold morning in the English countryside. The journey of a single peppercorn, from vine to table, could take 2 years. The sorcerer crushes it in 3 seconds. But those 3 seconds contain the entire medieval world, its trade routes, its ambitions, its vast distances bridged by human stubbornness and the universal desire to make food taste extraordinary. He sweeps the ground spices into a small clay bowl, sets it aside, reaches for the vinegar and the verjuice, the sour juice of unripe grapes that will form the base of today's sauce. His movements are precise, measured, almost delicate. In a kitchen defined by brute force and fire and heavy iron, the sorcerer is an artist working in miniature. And he knows, with quiet certainty, that the sauce he creates today will determine whether the roast cook's venison is remembered as a triumph or merely adequate.
The hierarchy is assembled. The meat is on the spit. The spices are ground. But before a single dish can leave this kitchen, the entire castle must first kneel, because in the medieval world, no one eats before God. But before we follow the sorcerer's work any further, there is a room we have not yet entered, a room that most of the kitchen staff will never be permitted to set foot inside, a room with a door made of heavy oak, reinforced with iron bands, secured with a lock that has only one key, and that key hangs from a cord around the head cook's neck, resting against his chest, day and night, even while he sleeps.
It is a small chamber, no larger than a modest bedchamber, adjoining the kitchen through a narrow corridor. The walls are lined with wooden shelves, and on those shelves sit rows of clay jars, stoppered with wax, each one labeled in a careful hand that most of the kitchen staff cannot read. Linen bags hang from iron hooks driven into the ceiling beams. Small wooden boxes, their lids fitted tight, are stacked in precise rows along the back wall. The air inside is extraordinary, dense, layered, almost intoxicating, warm and sweet and sharp all at once, like stepping into a room where a dozen different countries have each left something behind. This room is worth more than every other room in the kitchen combined. It is worth more, in fact, than the weapons in the armory. A single pound of saffron, those impossibly delicate red threads, costs more than a skilled laborer earns in an entire year. A pound of pepper, those small dark spheres the sorcerer ground so carefully a few minutes ago, could purchase a pig, or a sheep, or, in some regions, a modest plot of farmland. Cinnamon, nutmeg, cloves, mace, ginger, each one carries a price that reflects not merely its rarity, but the staggering distance it has traveled, and the number of hands it has passed through, and the number of dangers it has survived to reach this small, locked room in the English countryside. The lord of this castle does not think of spices as seasoning. He thinks of them as wealth, as status, as proof, laid out on his dinner table for every guest to see that he is a man of means and reach and sophistication. A heavily spiced dish is not simply delicious, it is a political statement. It says, I can afford what you cannot. My table reaches farther than yours. My influence extends to Venice, to Constantinople, to the markets of the East. And the head cook, the man with the key around his neck, is the guardian of that statement. Every morning, he enters the spicery alone. He selects what is needed for the day's menu. He measures it himself, by hand, with a precision that borders on obsessive. He records what he has taken, not in writing necessarily, but in the perfect ledger of his memory, because the steward will ask, and the steward always checks, and a discrepancy between what was used and what was served is a conversation that no head cook wants to have. He locks the door behind him when he leaves. The key returns to its cord. The cord returns to his chest. No one questions this. No one asks to see inside. The spicery is the head cook's domain, his private treasury, the physical proof of the trust the Lord has placed in him. To violate that trust, to steal even a pinch of pepper, would be a crime treated with the same severity as stealing silver from the Lord's strongbox, because in the economy of a medieval castle, it is the same thing. And then the kitchen stops. Not gradually, not with a winding down. It simply stops, because the chapel bell is ringing, and in a medieval castle, the chapel bell answers to no one's schedule but God's.
every person in the castle, lord and lady, steward and stable boy, knight and kitchen knave, is expected to attend the first service of the day. Expected is perhaps too gentle a word. Required, compelled. The chaplain keeps an eye on attendance the way the head cook keeps an eye on his spice stores, and an unexplained absence is noted, remembered, and eventually addressed. The kitchen staff file out through the heavy door, wiping their hands on their aprons as they go. The spit boy leaves his post, the first and only break he will receive until nightfall. The roast cook bangs his fire slightly, reducing the flame so the meat does not char in his absence. The scullions abandon their basins. Even the head cook goes, though he is the last to leave and the first to return, his mind never fully in the chapel, his thoughts running ahead to the dinner menu and the venison on the spit, and the question of whether the bread will be ready in time. The service is brief, 15 minutes, perhaps 20. The chaplain speaks in Latin. Most of the kitchen staff do not understand a word, but they know the rhythms: when to stand, when to kneel, when to cross themselves, when it is over. They have done this every morning of their lives, in this chapel or one like it, and they will do it every morning until they die. It is not questioned. It is not resented. It simply is, as constant and unremarkable as the sunrise, which, this morning, is finally beginning to color the narrow windows of the chapel with the first pale wash of gray-pink light. The prayers end. The kitchen staff file back, and as they cross the bailey in the early morning light, some of them are already eating.
Breakfast in a medieval castle is called the jentaculum, and it is nothing like the meal that word might suggest. There is no table, no ceremony, no seating arrangement. The kitchen staff eat standing up, leaning against walls, crouching beside the hearth, wherever they can find a space that is out of the way of the morning's work. The food is simple. Bread, the coarse, dark bread from the bottom of the oven, naturally. A piece of cheese, if there is any. Cold meat left from yesterday's supper, sliced thin and eaten with the fingers. And ale, always ale, poured from a wooden jug into wooden cups, because the water from the well is not trusted. No one calls it unsafe in so many words. They simply know, from long experience, that people who drink the water sometimes fall ill, and people who drink the ale almost never do. The science behind this, that the brewing process kills the organisms that contaminate the water, will not be understood for another 400 years. But the instinct is sound, and it saves lives daily. The spit boy eats a heel of bread and a lump of dripping, the solidified fat scraped from yesterday's roasting pan. It is greasy, salty, and for a child who burns more energy before dawn than most adults burn in a day, it is survival. He chews standing at his post, one hand still resting on the turning handle, because the spit does not stop for breakfast. The roast cook would not allow it. And here, as the kitchen settles into the brief, fragile calm between chapel and the chaos of dinner preparation, let me ask you something.
The spit boy has been awake for 2 hours. He has already hauled himself from a straw pallet on a stone floor, taken his position at the turning handle, and begun the 12-hour rotation that will not end until long after dark. His hands are burned. His breakfast is a scrap of bread and a smear of animal fat. He is 8 years old, and this is considered a good position, a privilege even, because at least he is allowed to eat the scraps from the Lord's table. Could you have lasted a single morning in this kitchen? I am genuinely curious. Let me know in the comments, and tell me which job you think you could have survived. The spit, the well, the scouring of the pots,
Or would you have tried your luck in the spicery, hoping the head cook might one day hand you the key? In the corner nearest the hearth, the great cauldron has been simmering since before dawn. But simmering is not quite the right word, because that implies a beginning, a moment when someone filled a pot with water and fresh ingredients and set it over the flame to cook. No one remembers when this cauldron was last emptied. It is the perpetual stew, the pottage, and it operates on a principle that is both practical and slightly unsettling. Each morning, water is added to replace what has evaporated overnight. Vegetables are thrown in, onions, leeks, turnips, cabbage, whatever the garden and the storeroom provide. Bones are dropped in for flavor and substance. Scraps of meat too small to roast or too tough to serve at the Lord's table find their way into its depths. Handfuls of barley or oats to thicken. A fistful of dried herbs, parsley, sage, thyme, from the bundles hanging above the preparation table. By midday, the liquid is rich and dark, and layered with the ghost of every ingredient that has passed through it. Not just today, but yesterday, and the day before, and the day before that. There are flavors in this cauldron that are weeks old, deepened and transformed by endless cycles of heating and cooling and reheating, blending into something that no recipe could replicate, because no recipe created it. Time created it. Repetition created it. The steady, unbroken rhythm of a kitchen that never fully stops. This is what the servants eat. This is their dinner, their sustenance, the thing that keeps them on their feet through 18-hour days of hauling and chopping and scrubbing and turning. A bowl of thick, dark pottage, ladled from a cauldron that has no beginning and no end. It will not win any place at the Lord's table, but it will keep a spit boy alive for another day. And in a medieval castle kitchen, that is enough. The morning's work is preparation. Every fire lit, every carcass butchered, every spice ground, every loaf baked, all of it building toward a single moment. And that moment is almost here. Because somewhere above, in the corridors of the castle, a servant is reaching for a horn. And when it sounds, the real pressure begins. You hear it before you understand it.
A single note, low and round and carrying, rolling out from somewhere above the kitchen, descending through stone corridors and servant stairs, and into this smoke-filled room like a wave breaking over a distant shoreline. It lasts perhaps 3 seconds. It needs to last no longer. Every person in this kitchen knows exactly what it means. Not yet, but soon. 1 hour, perhaps a little less. The horn is not a signal that the meal is ready. It is a warning, a countdown, a message from the steward to the head cook that says, without ambiguity or courtesy, the clock is running and it has no patience for delays. The head cook does not look up when the horn sounds. He has been tracking the time in his head since before dawn, measuring it not in minutes, but in the turning of the spit, the reducing of the sauce, the color of the bread crust, and the give of the meat beneath his thumb. He already knows how much time remains. But he hears the horn the way a sailor hears the lookout's cry, not as new information, but as confirmation, a check against his own reckoning. Everything accelerates. The spit boy turns faster. The scullions move with an urgency they did not have 10 minutes ago.
The roast cook leans over the venison haunch with a long-handled ladle, basting it in its own drippings, coaxing the skin toward that particular deep, crackling gold that signals readiness. The saucerer moves between his pots with controlled urgency, tasting, adjusting, tasting again. And upstairs, in the great hall, a different kind of preparation is underway.
The Great Hall is the castle's largest room, and for most of the day it serves everything: meetings, disputes, assemblies, audiences. But at the dinner hour, it transforms. Trestle tables are brought out and set on wooden frames, their surfaces scrubbed pale with sand and salt. Benches are arranged along both sides. Tablecloths, white linen, pressed and neatly folded, are laid with a care that might seem excessive until you understand precisely what they represent. A clean white tablecloth in the medieval world is a declaration. It separates the Lord's table from the straw-covered floor where the dogs wait patiently for scraps. It signals order, abundance, and the kind of steady control over one's household that a lord must constantly demonstrate to everyone around him. The high table is positioned on a raised platform at the far end of the hall, oriented so that the lord faces the room and the room faces the lord. This is deliberate. Every meal in a medieval castle is in part a performance, the lord demonstrating his power and generosity to the assembled household, and the household demonstrating its loyalty and gratitude in return. Seating arrangements are not casual choices. They are a precise map of the castle's social geography, redrawn and reaffirmed at every meal. The lord and his family sit at the high table. Distinguished guests take their places beside them or at the nearest trestle below. Knights and senior officers of the household, the steward, the chamberlain, the marshal, occupy the tables closest to the front. The further from the high table you sit, the further from the center of power you stand. Everyone in this room knows where they belong. To be moved closer to the Lord is a quiet honor. To be placed further away is a quiet rebuke. No one is told. Everyone understands.
Before a single dish appears, before a single person is fully settled, there is ceremony. A servant moves through the hall carrying a ewer, a tall, narrow-necked vessel of hammered copper, filled with warm water scented faintly with rose petals or lavender, depending on what the castle garden has offered this morning. Beside him, a second servant carries a wide basin and a folded linen cloth. Together they move from guest to guest, pouring water over extended hands, offering the cloth for drying. This is not optional. It is not merely hygienic, though it is that too, in a world of shared dishes and fingers used in place of forks. It is ritual, a threshold. The act of washing one's hands before a meal signals readiness, presence, and willingness to participate in what is about to unfold. The Lord is served first, always. He extends his hands over the basin with the ease of a man who has performed this gesture 10,000 times, and the servant pours without spilling a drop, because spilling on the Lord is not an experience that improves anyone standing in this household. The water moves through the room in strict order of rank, from the high table outward, and by the time it reaches the lower benches, it is noticeably cooler and considerably less fragrant. The servant at the far end receives the same ceremony, the same ewer, the same cloth, with simply less warmth and considerably more haste.
And then the steward straightens, clears his throat, nods once to the servant waiting at the corridor entrance, still and patient for precisely this signal. The servant turns, walks back through the passageway, down the stone stairs, to the kitchen door. He knocks twice.
The head cook looks up, for the first time in an hour, meeting the messenger's eyes with an expression that holds in equal measure complete confidence and the quiet composure of a man who knows that what comes next will either confirm his mastery or expose its limits. He straightens his apron, takes one slow breath, and from below, the first covered tray is lifted from the preparation table. The server squares his shoulders and begins the long walk up the stone stairs toward the candlelit hall, the seated lord, and the meal that 14 hours of labor have been building toward, this single, unhurried moment. The procession has begun. And now it arrives, dish by dish, course by course, carried in procession through corridors of stone. But what exactly reaches the Lord's table, and why, tells you everything about power, medicine, and the strange science of a medieval feast. The first dish arrives at the Lord's table, and the room takes notice. It is carried on a broad wooden tray by a servant who walks with careful, measured steps, not because the tray is heavy, though it is, but because the act of carrying food to the high table is in itself a performance. He holds the tray high at shoulder level, so the hall can see what approaches. And what approaches is the centerpiece of the entire meal.
It has been on the spit since before dawn. 6 hours of slow, patient turning over an open fire, basted again and again in its own rendered fat, until the skin has turned a deep, burnished gold that glistens in the candlelight. The roast cook carved it from the spit with the focus of a man presenting his life's work for judgment, because in a very real sense, that is exactly what he was doing. The meat is arranged on the tray with sprigs of rosemary and sage tucked beneath it, not for flavor, but for presentation, for beauty, because a lord's meal must please the eye before it ever reaches the tongue. Behind the venison comes a second tray, and a third, and a fourth, each one carried by a different servant, each one held high for the room to witness. A roasted swan, its skin redressed with its own feathers after cooking, so that it arrives at the table looking almost alive, wings spread, neck curved, as if it might at any moment rise from the platter and take flight. This is artistry. This is theater. The kitchen has spent hours on this single illusion, skinning the bird before roasting, preserving the feathers, then carefully draping them back over the cooked flesh so that the Lord's guests gasp before they eat. A great pie, its crust thick and architectural, stamped with the Lord's coat of arms using a carved wooden mold. Inside, layers of boned chicken, pigeon, and bacon, seasoned with pepper and ginger, bound with egg and stock into a dense, savory filling that will hold its shape when sliced. Pies like these are not merely food, they are engineering. The pastry crust is a vessel, a container, designed to preserve and transport the filling, and in many cases the crust itself is not eaten by the Lord at all. It is discarded downward, to the lower tables, to the servants, to the dogs. And then the sauces.
The sorcerer's work arrives in small ceramic bowls, each one a concentrated expression of the spicery's treasures. A green sauce of parsley, vinegar, and ginger, sharp and bright, meant to cut through the richness of roasted meat. A camelline sauce, warm, amber-colored, built on a base of cinnamon and cloves, and sweetened with a touch of honey. A mustard so potent that it brings tears to the eyes of anyone who leans too close. These sauces are not afterthoughts. In the medieval hierarchy of culinary skill, the sorcerer's craft is considered more refined, more demanding, and more prestigious than the roast cook's brute mastery of fire. Anyone can turn a spit. Not anyone can balance saffron against verjuice, against the particular gaminess of a 3-day hung hare. But today is not a feast day, and today is not a fasting day. It is an ordinary Tuesday, which means the meal, while impressive by any modern standard, is restrained by medieval ones. 2 courses, each containing 3 or 4 dishes. On a feast day, a saint's day, a wedding, a visit from a neighboring lord, this same kitchen would produce 5 courses, each containing 8 or 10 dishes, and the meal would last 3 hours. On a fasting day, the table would look entirely different. No meat, no animal fat, no butter or cheese or eggs, depending on the strictness of the fast. And fasting days are not rare. They consume roughly 1/3 of the medieval year, every Friday, every Wednesday in some households, the 40 days of Lent, the vigils before major saints' days, ember days at the change of each season.
On those days, the kitchen pivots. The head cook draws on a different repertoire entirely. Pike from the castle fish pond, poached in wine and served with a sauce of almonds and saffron. Herring, salted, smoked, or fresh depending on the season, dressed with ginger and cinnamon. Eel pies. Stockfish soaked for days to soften its board-like rigidity, then simmered in almond milk until it yields. Elaborate tarts filled with onions, cream cheese, dried fruit, and eggs. The Ember Day tart, a dish that appears with such regularity that even the scullions know its recipe by heart. The creativity required on fasting days is, paradoxically, greater than on any meat day. And the head cook's reputation often rests not on his ability to roast a haunch of venison, any competent cook can do that, but on his ability to make a meatless Wednesday feel indistinguishable from a feast. At the high table, the Lord eats from a trencher, a thick slab of day-old bread, cut flat and wide, serving as both plate and utensil. The meat is placed upon it. The sauces pool into its surface. By the end of the meal, the trencher is soaked through with juices and fat and the residue of every dish it has held. The Lord does not eat this bread. He has his own manchet, soft, white, fresh from the morning's baking, sitting beside his cup. The trencher is passed down from the high table, down past the knights and the household officers, down past the lower tables, growing colder and more sodden with each transfer, until it reaches the servants. And the servants eat it, every last crumb. Because this grease-soaked bread, flavored with the ghost of the Lord's meal, is the closest most of them will ever come to tasting what sits on that high table. And here, at the dinner table, that small daily act we spoke of earlier, the sorting of the bread, completes itself. The baker, hours ago, pulled each loaf from the oven and turned it over. The top of the loaf, golden, clean, unblemished, was set aside for the Lord and his guests. The bottom, blackened, ash-covered, scarred by the oven floor, was sent to the servants' table. The upper crust went up. The lower crust went down. And a phrase was born that would outlive every person in this room by 600 years. The food has arrived. The hall is eating. But the meal is governed by rules as strict as any law in the land. Rules about which fingers to use, where to look, and what happens when something goes terribly, irreversibly wrong. Watch the Lord's hands. Not because they are remarkable in themselves, they are the hands of a man who has never scrubbed a cauldron or gripped a frozen well rope, but because of how he uses them. He reaches for a piece of venison on his trencher, but he does not reach with all 5 fingers. He reaches with 3, thumb, forefinger, and middle finger. Only these 3. The remaining 2, ring finger and little finger, are held slightly extended,
curled gently away from the food, never touching it. These are the fingers of courtesy. It sounds almost absurd to a modern ear, a rule about which fingers may touch your dinner, but in the medieval world, this small gesture carries enormous weight. It is proof of breeding, of education, of belonging. A man who eats with all 5 fingers is marking himself as common, as unrefined, as someone who has not been taught the elaborate code of behavior that separates the high table from the lower benches. A man who eats with 3 fingers is saying without words, I know the rules, I belong here. And the rules extend far beyond the fingers. Do not lean your elbows on the table. Do not pick your teeth with your knife. Do not blow on your food to cool it. Let it sit. Let patience demonstrate your self-control. Do not dip your bread directly into the communal salt cellar. Take a small portion of salt with the tip of your knife and place it on your trencher first. Do not scratch your head at the table. Do not touch your ears. Do not, and the medieval etiquette manuals are remarkably specific on this point, wiggle or waggle your body while seated, as this suggests an unquiet mind, and worse, an unquiet stomach.
These instructions were not informal suggestions passed down by word of mouth. They were written, codified, published in courtesy books, small, serious volumes with titles like The Baby's Book and Stans Puer ad Mensum, that were studied by the children of noble households as part of their formal education. A young page sent to serve at a lord's table would have memorized these rules the way a young monk memorizes scripture, completely, unquestioningly, and with the understanding that failure would bring immediate and public correction. Because the table is a stage, and every person seated at it is performing for the Lord, for the guests, for each other. A breach of etiquette at dinner is not a private embarrassment. It is a public failure, witnessed by the entire household, and it reflects not only on the individual, but on whoever trained them, employed them, or invited them to sit at that particular table. The Lord eats slowly, deliberately, 3 fingers, straight back, eyes forward, a model of control in a room designed to observe him.
Between courses, the hall is entertained. A minstrel stands near the central hearth, a lean, animated figure in a patchwork tunic, his voice rising and falling with the practiced cadence of a man who earns his supper by holding a room's attention. Tonight, he is recounting the deeds of a famous knight, a tale of siege and honor and a sword that never dulled, embellished with enough dramatic pauses and raised eyebrows to keep even the most distracted squire engaged. The Lord listens with half an ear. He has heard this story before, or one very like it, but he permits the performance because entertainment at dinner is expected, and a lord who provides no entertainment is a lord whose hospitality is quietly questioned. On feast days, the entertainment would be grander. Jugglers, acrobats, a troupe of traveling players performing a short comic scene between the 3rd and 4th courses, and on the most important occasions, a royal visit, a wedding, a celebration of military victory, something altogether more extraordinary would appear on the table itself. The word does not mean what you think. In the medieval kitchen, a subtlety is not a quality of character or a shade of meaning. It is a sculpture, an edible construction, sometimes enormous, sometimes breathtakingly intricate, fashioned from sugar paste, marzipan, pastry, and colored with saffron and sandalwood and crushed berries.
A subtlety might depict a castle under siege, complete with tiny soldiers scaling marzipan walls, or a ship in full sail, its hull made of hardened sugar, its rigging spun from threads of caramel, or the Lord's coat of arms, rendered in painstaking detail, standing 2 feet tall at the center of the high table. These creations take days to construct. They are the head cook's masterpiece, his signature, his statement, his proof that this kitchen is capable of more than mere sustenance. A well-executed subtlety earns applause, admiration, and the kind of quiet nod from the Lord that secures a head cook's position for another season. A poorly executed one does the opposite.
And this is the moment, the space between courses, when the platters are carried back down the stone stairs to the kitchen, that the head cook feels the weight most acutely. He stands at his station, watching each tray return, reading the remains. A platter that comes back nearly empty is a success. The dish was eaten, appreciated, consumed with appetite. A platter that returns with food still on it is a message. Perhaps the seasoning was off. Perhaps the meat was overcooked. Perhaps the Lord simply was not hungry. But a head cook cannot afford to assume that. He must assume the worst, because the worst is always possible. The taster has already done his work. Before each dish reached the Lord's table, a designated servant, sometimes the steward himself, sometimes a trusted page, tasted a portion of every dish in a small anteroom between the kitchen and the hall. This is not ceremony. This is survival. The fear of poison runs through the medieval aristocracy like a constant low-grade fever. Not irrational, not exaggerated, but grounded in a world where political enemies are real, where succession disputes end in violence, and where a well-placed substance in a sauce could accomplish what an army could not. The taster eats. He waits. If he shows no signs of distress after several minutes, the dish proceeds to the Lord. If he falters, if he so much as coughs at the wrong moment, the dish is removed, the kitchen is questioned, and the head cook's world narrows to a single, terrifying point. It has not happened today. It has not happened in this kitchen for years, but the head cook has heard the stories. Every head cook has, of cooks dragged from their kitchens in chains on the strength of a Lord's stomachache, of cooks beaten in the courtyard for a dish that tasted wrong, of one cook in a French household a generation ago who was forced to eat an entire pot of suspect stew himself in front of the assembled household to prove it was not poisoned.
He survived. The stew was fine. But the humiliation, the raw public exposure of a man reduced from master of his domain to a suspect on trial, that story has traveled through every kitchen in England and France. Every cook knows it. Every cook carries it. And so the head cook watches the platter's return, reads the remains, measures the silence from above, because silence from the great hall can mean satisfaction, or it can mean something else entirely. Today, the platters come back scraped clean. The venison is gone. The pie is gone. The sauces have been mopped from their bowls with torn pieces of manchet. The subtlety, a modest one today, a small sugar castle with a marzipan banner, has been admired and dismantled and eaten by the Lord's children, who are allowed this indulgence on ordinary days.
The head cook permits himself a single brief exhale. Not relief, he would never call it that. Simply the quiet release of a breath he did not realize he had been holding. The meal has succeeded, but the day is not over.
The day is never over. Consider for a moment the man standing at the center of that kitchen, watching the platters return, reading the scraps, measuring silence. A man who commands 30 people, manages a budget that would rival a merchant's, and creates works of edible art that take days to build. A man who has never been formally educated, who began his career as a burned child turning a spit, and who knows that everything he has built, his position, his authority, the trust of the Lord above, could be undone by a single fish that tastes wrong on the wrong evening. If you were in his shoes, would you sleep well tonight? I suspect not, but we will find out soon enough. The great hall is emptying. The last cups are drained, the last crumbs brushed from the linen. But downstairs, the kitchen's day is far from finished, because now comes the part that no one sees, no one celebrates, and no one envies: the washing. The applause, such as it was, belonged to the cooks. The venison was theirs, the sauces were theirs, the subtlety, that little sugar castle with its marzipan banner, was theirs. The Lord's clean platters, the guest's satisfaction, the steward's approving silence, all of it flowed upward from the kitchen to the hall like heat rising from a hearth. But what flows back down is something else entirely. It begins as a trickle. A single serving boy descending the stone stairs with a stack of trenchers, their surfaces dark and sodden with meat juices. Then a second boy, carrying an iron pot crusted with the remains of a sauce that has baked itself onto the metal in a ring of blackened residue. Then a third, a fourth, a fifth, each one adding to the growing mountain of dirty vessels accumulating on the stone floor beside the washing station. Within 15 minutes, the full scale of the aftermath becomes clear. Cauldrons, roasting pans, spit cradles smeared with congealed fat, carving boards stained with blood, ladles, skimmers, and long-handled forks caked with residue, ceramic sauce bowls, wooden trenchers, dozens of them, split and softened by hours of absorbing hot liquid. The great iron dripping pan that sat beneath the venison all morning, now holding 3 inches of solidified animal fat that will need to be scraped out by hand before the pan can even be submerged in water. And standing before this mountain, this daily Everest of grease and iron and crusted food, are the scullions. There are 4 of them today, 3 boys and a girl, all between the ages of 10 and 14, all occupying the lowest rung of the kitchen hierarchy, below the spit boys, below the kitchen knaves, below everyone. The scullion's position is so lowly that the word itself, scullion, will eventually become an insult, a term of contempt that Shakespeare will reach for when he wants to strip a character of every last shred of dignity. They do not have soap. Soap exists in the medieval world, a soft, greasy substance made from animal fat and wood ash, but it is expensive, and the kitchen supply is reserved for the linen tablecloths and the Lord's personal washing. The scullions clean with what the earth provides. Sand, collected from the riverbank in coarse linen bags, stored in a wooden bin beside the washing station. It is the primary abrasive, scooped by the handful and applied directly to the surface of a greasy pot, then scrubbed in hard circular motions with bare hands or a bundle of dried rushes twisted into a rough pad. The sand bites into the metal, grinding away layers of baked-on residue, stripping the surface back to bare iron. It also bites into the hands that wield it. By the end of a single washing session, the scullion's palms are raw, abraded, reddened, sometimes bleeding at the creases where the skin has cracked from the constant friction of grit against wet flesh. Ash, taken from the hearth, still warm sometimes, and mixed with water to form a thick alkaline paste,
This is the medieval equivalent of a degreaser. The lye in the wood ash breaks down animal fat on contact, dissolving what the sand alone cannot reach. It is effective. It is also corrosive. The same chemical reaction that cuts through grease also cuts through skin, and scullions who work with ash paste daily develop a condition that the medieval household would have recognized immediately: hands that are perpetually red, perpetually cracked, perpetually sore. A scullion's hands are the most telling mark of their station. You could identify one across a crowded room simply by looking at their fingers. The washing follows a strict order that no one has written down, but everyone obeys. The Lord's vessels are cleaned first: the silver cups, the carved wooden mazers, the fine ceramic bowls that are too valuable to risk in a careless hand. These are washed gently, almost reverently, in the cleanest water. Then the cooking vessels, the cauldrons and pans and spit cradles, attacked with sand and ash in considerable force. And finally, last of all, the trenchers and the wooden utensils, the disposable infrastructure of the meal, cleaned or discarded depending on their condition.
The water in the washing basin turns gray within minutes, then brown, then a dark, opaque soup of grease and ash and food particles that grows thicker and colder as the afternoon wears on. It is changed when it becomes too foul to function, which is to say, not often enough. Fresh water means another trip to the well, and the well is 60 paces away, and the wooden yoke is heavy, and the scullions are already exhausted. The physical toll is cumulative and relentless. A scullion's day begins before the cooks rise, and ends after they sleep. They are the first to haul water, and the last to finish cleaning. Their arms ache from the repetitive motion of scrubbing, the same circular movement, hundreds of times, against surfaces that resist every stroke. Their backs ache from bending over the stone washing basin, which is positioned at a height designed for adults, not children. Their knees ache from kneeling on the stone floor to reach the inside of cauldrons too large to lift onto the basin. And their hands. Always their hands. The eldest scullion, a girl of perhaps 13, works with a quiet, mechanical efficiency that suggests she stopped thinking about what she was doing a long time ago. Her movements are automatic. Scoop the sand. Apply it to the pot. Scrub in circles. Rinse. Stack. Reach for the next one. Her eyes are focused on nothing in particular, a middle-distance stare that belongs to someone whose body is present, but whose mind has retreated to the only place where the work cannot follow. She does not complain. None of them do. Complaining requires an audience that cares, and in the kitchen hierarchy, scullions are functionally invisible. The head cook does not address them directly. He speaks to the kitchen knaves, who relay instructions downward. The roast cook does not acknowledge them unless a pan has been improperly cleaned, in which case the acknowledgement is swift, sharp, and not repeated. The spit boys, those burned, exhausted children who rank only one step above, look at the scullions with the quiet relief of people who know that someone, at least, has it worse. The mountain shrinks, slowly, pot by pot, pan by pan, trencher by trencher. The pile on the stone floor diminishes, and the stack of clean vessels on the drying rack grows. It will take 3 hours, sometimes 4. And when it is finished, when the last cauldron is scrubbed, and the last basin emptied, and the washing station mopped with the final bucket of gray water, there will be no acknowledgement, no nod from the head cook, no word of thanks from the steward above. The scullions will simply stand, flex their ruined hands, and wait for supper, which they will eat from the same cauldron whose perpetual stew they have been smelling all day, ladled into wooden bowls that they themselves scrubbed clean an hour ago. And tomorrow the mountain will return. The pots are clean, the kitchen floor is swept, but the afternoon holds one more task, quieter than the washing, smaller than the feast, yet in some ways more revealing than anything we have witnessed today. Because now, in the brief stillness between dinner and supper, the kitchen prepares for tomorrow. And the things it must preserve today will teach us something remarkable about how medieval people fought their oldest, most relentless enemy, decay.
The Great Wash is over. The scullions have retreated to their corner. The spit boy sits on the hearthstone, his arms limp at his sides, his eyes half closed, stealing the only rest he will be permitted between now and nightfall. The kitchen breathes, but the head cook does not rest. He cannot, because the dinner that has just been served, the venison, the pies, the sauces, the bread, consumed nearly everything that was prepared yesterday. And tomorrow 300 mouths will open again, and the day after that, and the day after that. The medieval kitchen does not operate meal to meal. It operates season to season, in a constant, grinding battle against the one enemy that no amount of skill or fire or iron can fully defeat: decay. There is no refrigeration. There are no sealed containers, no vacuum packing, no chemical preservatives. There is only what the medieval world has learned through centuries of trial and catastrophic error to use against the relentless advance of rot. And every method comes down to the same principle: removing the moisture that bacteria need to consume food from within. Salt is the first weapon, and in a medieval castle, salt is not a seasoning. It is a strategic resource. The head cook oversees the salting himself, standing at the long preparation table where a freshly butchered side of pork has been laid out, its surface glistening, its clock already ticking. He works with his hands, pressing coarse gray salt, harvested from coastal evaporation pans, or in wealthier households, mined from underground deposits, into every surface of the meat, into the cuts, into the cavities, into the spaces between muscle and bone, where moisture hides and rot begins. The salt draws water out of the flesh through a process that no one in this kitchen can name or explain, but that every one of them understands intuitively. Wet meat spoils, dry meat survives. The salted pork is placed in a wooden trough and covered with more salt, buried in it, entombed, where it will remain for days, sometimes weeks, slowly transforming from raw flesh into something harder, drier, and almost indefinitely preserved. Salt pork will last months. Salt fish will last a year. Salt beef, properly cured, can survive a sea voyage from England to the Holy Land and arrive edible on the other side. But salt alone is not enough.
Behind the main kitchen, through a low doorway that you would miss entirely if you did not know it was there, stands the smokehouse. It is a small, windowless chamber, barely 10 feet square, with a fire pit set into the floor and iron hooks driven into the ceiling beams at varying heights. The fire here is not the roaring blaze of the kitchen hearth. It is a slow, smoldering bed of hardwood chips, oak and beech preferred, applewood when available, producing not heat but smoke, dense, fragrant, continuous smoke that fills the chamber from floor to ceiling and coats everything inside with a thin amber-colored film. Hanging from the hooks are the products of yesterday's preservation work. Strips of venison, cut thin and dangled in rows like dark, leathery curtains. A brace of fish, trout from the castle's stream, split and splayed open on wooden frames. Sausages, their casings made from the cleaned intestines of the pig butchered this morning, filled with a mixture of minced pork, blood, and herbs, tied at intervals with rough twine. The smoke does two things simultaneously. It dries the surface of the meat, creating a hard outer layer, a rind almost, that seals moisture inside while preventing new moisture from entering. And the chemicals within the smoke itself, compounds that will not be identified by science for another 500 years, act as natural antimicrobials, killing the organisms on the meat's surface that would otherwise begin the process of decomposition within hours. The result is food that lasts, not days, months. Smoked fish, stored properly, will carry a household through an entire winter. Smoked sausage can hang in a dry larder from autumn to spring without spoiling. In a world without refrigeration, the smokehouse is not a luxury. It is the difference between a castle that eats in February and a castle that starves. Below the kitchen, reached by a narrow staircase worn smooth by centuries of feet, lies the undercroft, the storage vault, and stepping into it is like stepping into another climate entirely.
The air is cold, not the sharp, biting cold of the Bailey in winter, but a deep, stable, year-round coolness that comes from being surrounded on all sides by thick stone walls buried partially underground. The temperature here barely changes from season to season, cool in summer, merely cold in winter, and this natural constancy makes it the most valuable storage space in the entire castle. The shelves along the walls hold the castle's reserves, barrels of salted herrings stacked 3 high, wheels of hard cheese wrapped in waxed cloth, each one stamped with the date of its making. Sacks of dried peas and beans, the staple proteins of the medieval poor and the emergency rations of the medieval rich. Barrels of flour, sealed with wooden lids weighted down with stones to keep the rats out. Crocks of honey, the only sweetener most medieval kitchens will ever use, and one that, remarkably, never spoils. Honey found in Egyptian tombs 3,000 years old has been tested and found still edible. The medieval cook does not know this fact, but he knows the principle behind it. Honey lasts, and anything preserved in honey lasts with it. The head cook descends into this vault once each afternoon. He counts. He inspects, he checks for signs of spoilage, the telltale smell of turning fish, the soft give of a cheese wheel whose rind has been breached by insects, the dark stain of moisture creeping up the side of a flour sack from a crack in the stone floor. He makes his calculations quietly, the same way he plans his menus, in his head, without paper, holding the entire inventory of the castle's food supply in a memory trained by decades of practice. He is still in the undercroft when the sound reaches him, hooves in the bailey. The hunting party has returned. The head cook climbs the stairs and steps into the kitchen doorway just as the huntsman's boy appears, breathless, mud-spattered, grinning with the particular satisfaction of a child who has witnessed something exciting and wants everyone to know it. The news is significant.
a stag, a large one, plus 3 hares and a quantity of wild birds, partridge, woodcock, a pair of pheasants. And the Lord has declared that tomorrow night will be a feast, not a formal occasion, no visiting dignitaries, no political purpose, simply a celebration of a good hunt, a generous kill, and the Lord's desire to reward his household for their service. The head cook receives this news with the same expression he wears for everything, composed, unreadable, already calculating. A feast means triple the normal output, triple the courses, triple the dishes, triple the bread and the sauces and the washing that follows. It means the kitchen will begin work not at 3 o'clock tomorrow morning, but at midnight. It means every pair of hands in this castle that can be spared will be pressed into service. And it means the village women. Within the hour, a kitchen knave is dispatched on foot to the nearest village, a small cluster of cottages half a mile beyond the castle walls, carrying a message from the head cook. It is not a request, it is a summons. Tomorrow morning, before dawn, 6 women from the village are expected at the kitchen door, ready to work. They will come. They always come. Partly because refusal is not practically an option. The Lord's authority extends to the village as surely as it extends to the castle, and a summons from the kitchen carries the implicit weight of that authority. But partly, too, because the work brings compensation, not coin, rarely coin, but food, a share of the feast's leftovers, bread from the castle ovens, perhaps a piece of salted meat or a small pot of dripping to carry home. For a village family in the medieval countryside, where a single failed harvest can mean genuine hunger, this is not a trivial reward, it is a lifeline. And so the women will arrive in the darkness before dawn, wrapped in rough cloaks, their hands already chapped from their own domestic labors, and they will step into the heat and noise and organized chaos of the castle kitchen, and they will do whatever the head cook requires, peeling, chopping, plucking birds, scrubbing root vegetables in cold water until their fingers ache, kneading dough alongside the baker until their shoulders burn. They are not part of the kitchen hierarchy. They have no rank, no title, no permanent place. They are borrowed labor, summoned and released as needed, invisible in the household records, unnamed in any account book. They come, they work, they take their payment in bread and dripping. They walk home in the dark. And tomorrow the castle will feast, and no one at the high table will know or think to ask whose hands prepared the food they are eating. The hunting party's kill hangs in the larder. The village women have been summoned. Tomorrow's feast is taking shape in the head cook's mind. But tonight, before any of that begins, the kitchen must do one last thing. It must feed itself. And as the light fades and the castle grows quiet, the servants will gather around their own meal, the simplest, the humblest, and perhaps the most honest food this kitchen will produce all day. Supper was a quiet affair.
Not the performance of dinner. No horn, no procession, no subtleties arranged on silver trays. Supper in a medieval castle is a smaller meal, served in the late afternoon or early evening, and it carries none of the ceremony that governs the midday feast. The lord and his family eat in their private chambers or in the solar, that upper room where the last of the day's light filters through narrow windows, and the conversation is softer, more intimate, unburdened by the politics of the great hall. The food reflects the mood. Cold meats left from dinner, bread, cheese, perhaps a simple dish of eggs prepared by the head cook's assistant, scrambled with herbs or baked in a small clay pot with cream and a scraping of nutmeg. Wine for the lord, ale for the household. Nothing that demands the full machinery of the kitchen,
nothing that requires the spit boy to take his position or the sorcerer to unlock the spicery. The kitchen staff eat their own supper at the same time, the perpetual pottage, of course, ladled into wooden bowls and eaten in the same standing, leaning, crouching postures they have occupied since morning. The bread is the last of the day's baking, the coarsest loaves, slightly stale, dipped into the broth to soften. It is enough. It is always just enough. As darkness settles over the castle, a final service is performed. The word has nothing to do with uniforms, not yet. In the medieval household, livery means an allowance, a ration. Specifically, it is the nightly distribution of food, drink, and candles to the Lord's private chambers, everything he and his family will need between supper and morning. It is called, in the plain language of the household accounts, the all-night. A servant carries the tray upstairs. On it, a jug of wine, a loaf of fine manchet wrapped in linen, a dish of dried fruits, figs perhaps, or dates imported from the Mediterranean, a stub of beeswax candle, and a small pot of something warm, spiced wine, heated gently and sweetened with honey, intended to ease the Lord into sleep. The kitchen has prepared this without being asked, because the kitchen prepares it every night, and has prepared it every night for as long as anyone can remember. The Lord does not thank the servant who brings it. The servant does not expect thanks. This is the texture of routine, so deeply embedded in the household's daily rhythm that it has become invisible to both parties. The tray is delivered, the door closes, the servant descends the stairs for the last time today.
Below the buttery, that room adjacent to the kitchen where the ale and wine are stored, is being locked. The butler turns his key with the same careful deliberation that the head cook applies to the spicery each morning. The buttery and the spicery are the two locked rooms of the medieval household, and their keepers guard them with equal vigilance, because both contain wealth in liquid form, one measured in spices, the other in barrels. The click of the lock is one of the last purposeful sounds of the day. After it, the castle's working life is effectively over. The steward has retired to his quarters. The marshal has checked the stables one final time. The chaplain has said Compline, the last prayer of the canonical hours, to a chapel that was more empty than full, because by this hour exhaustion outweighs devotion in all but the most pious hearts. In the kitchen, the head cook performs his last inspection. He moves through the room slowly, not with the coiled alertness of the morning, but with the heavy, measured tread of a man whose body has been in motion for 17 hours. He checks the larder door, locked. The spicery, locked. The preparation tables have been scrubbed with sand and wiped dry. The knives are racked. The cauldron, that perpetual, bottomless vessel, still simmers gently, its contents reduced and thickened by a full day over the fire. Tomorrow morning, fresh water will be added, and the cycle will continue. He pauses at the bread ovens, places his hand flat against the stone. Still warm. The residual heat will hold until morning, and the baker, who will rise before anyone else, as he always does, will coax it back to baking temperature with a fresh fire laid in the oven's belly long before the head cook lifts the couvre-feu from the main hearth.
Everything is accounted for. Everything is in its place. The kitchen is a machine, and the machine has been shut down for the night with the same care it was started this morning, systematically, thoroughly, with nothing left to chance. The servants are already settling, straw pallets unrolled on the stone floor, cloaks pulled tight. The scullions have claimed their usual spot,
furthest from the fire, nearest the draught from the door. The spit boy has curled into his place on the hearthstone, his bandaged hands tucked beneath his chin, his breathing already beginning to slow. He has turned the spit for 12 hours today. His arms will ache in the morning. They ache every morning. The head cook is the last to lie down. He always is. He stands before the hearth. The fire has burned down to a deep orange bed of embers, the same state it was in when he found it this morning, 18 hours ago. He reaches for the iron poker and rakes the embers inward, gathering them from the edges of the hearth into a tight glowing mound at the center. The same mound, the same position, the same careful geometry of heat and air that he has constructed every night for 20 years. Then he reaches for the couvre-feu.
The dome of fired clay is warm in his hands. It has been sitting beside the hearth all day, absorbing heat, waiting for this moment. He lifts it, and he lowers it slowly over the mound of embers, settling it into place with a soft scrape of clay on stone, leaving the narrow gap at the base just wide enough for a breath of air to enter, just narrow enough to prevent a flame from escaping. The couvre-feu, the cover of the fire, the curfew. The word that began as a kitchen ritual, a nightly act of preservation and protection, and traveled outward from this room through centuries of use until it shed its original meaning entirely and became something else. A time, a rule, a bell rung at sunset in medieval towns, ordering all fires covered and all candles extinguished. A regulation so universal, so embedded in the rhythm of daily life that the word survived the practice by hundreds of years. Every night when a modern city declares a curfew, every time that word is spoken on a news broadcast or printed in a headline, it carries within it the ghost of this moment. A cook kneeling before a hearth, a dome of clay lowered over dying embers, a kitchen falling silent. The fire is covered. The kitchen is dark. And now the kitchen sleeps. But before we let it rest, before we let the embers dim and the stone walls hold their warmth through the long, quiet hours of the night, there is one more thing I want to show you. Not in this kitchen, not in this castle, but across the whole of medieval England, the kitchens we will never see, the ones that history forgot.
The kitchen is dark now, but it is not empty. It is never empty. The servants sleep where they work, not because they choose to, but because there is nowhere else. The kitchen is the warmest room in the castle, and warmth in the medieval world is not a comfort. It is a resource. It is the difference between waking stiff and cold and waking at all. In the depths of an English winter, when the temperature outside the castle walls drops below freezing and the stone corridors radiate a cold so deep it aches in the bones, the kitchen hearth is the only reliable source of heat available to the lowest members of the household. And so they sleep here, all of them, 30 bodies arranged across the stone floor, in a pattern that has been negotiated, contested, and settled over months and years of shared habitation. Like everything else in this kitchen, the sleeping arrangement follows a hierarchy, unwritten, unspoken, but absolute. The head cook sleeps nearest the pantry door, on a straw pallet that is marginally thicker and marginally cleaner than the others. It is the only pallet that is replaced regularly, a small privilege that reflects his status, and one that no other member of the kitchen staff would dream of questioning. His position near the pantry is not accidental. Even in sleep, he is guarding the stores.
The roast cook and the sorcerer sleep along the far wall, their pallets separated by a respectful distance. Two men who work side by side all day, but who, in the private hours of the night, maintain the quiet boundaries of their separate crafts. The baker does not sleep here at all. He sleeps in the bakehouse beside his ovens because his working day begins at 2 o'clock in the morning, and the walk from the kitchen would cost him minutes he cannot spare. The kitchen knaves, the older boys, the ones who haul water and carry trays and relay the head cook's orders to the scullions, sleep in a loose group near the center of the room. They are old enough to claim space, young enough to share warmth without self-consciousness, and tired enough to fall asleep within minutes of lying down. Their pallets are stuffed with straw that has not been changed in weeks. It smells of sweat and smoke, and the faint, sour undertone of damp grain. They do not notice. They have never known anything else. The scullions sleep nearest the door, the coldest spot, the draftiest, the place where the wind finds every crack in the frame and sends thin fingers of freezing air across the floor at ankle height. They sleep curled tight, knees drawn up, arms folded across their chests, cloaks pulled over their heads, in the defensive posture of small bodies trying to occupy as little space as possible while losing as little heat as they can. And they are not alone. The rats come out when the kitchen stills. They emerge from the gaps between the flagstones, from the cracks where the walls meet the floor, from the straw-stuffed cavities behind the storage shelves where they have built nests that no amount of cleaning will permanently dislodge. They are bold, emboldened by generations of coexistence with humans who have tried everything to eliminate them and failed. Cats help. Traps help. But the rats are patient, and the kitchen offers what no trap or cat can permanently deny them: food. Scraps in the rushes, grease on the hearthstone, crumbs in the cracks of the preparation table, the faint residual sweetness of honey on a jar's rim. The servants hear them. Of course they hear them. The scratch of tiny claws on stone is one of the permanent sounds of the medieval night, as familiar as the wind, as constant as the fire's low breathing. The kitchen knaves have long since stopped flinching at it. The scullions pull their cloaks tighter, but do not wake. The spit boy, curled on the hearthstone with his back pressed against the base of the chimney breast, sleeps through it entirely, because his body has learned to prioritize rest over vigilance in the few hours it is permitted. Only the head cook stirs. He opens one eye, listens, identifies the direction of the sound, near the preparation table where a careless knave has left a smear of dripping on the wood, and files it away for tomorrow's correction. Then he closes his eye and lets the sound dissolve into the general texture of the night. The rats are a problem, but they are not his most urgent problem. They are simply part of the room, as permanent as the stone, as inevitable as the smoke stains on the ceiling. And now, in the near darkness, with only the faintest amber glow leaking from beneath the couvre-feu, something shifts. The fire that burned them all day is keeping them alive tonight. The spit boy's burned hands, wrapped in their gray linen bandages, are warm because the hearthstone beneath him holds the memory of 12 hours of blaze.
The same heat that blistered his skin, that left the shiny, tight scars across his palms and fingers, is now radiating upward through the stone and into his small body, keeping his blood moving, keeping his muscles from seizing in the cold, keeping him functional for the morning that will arrive, as it always does, far too soon.
There is something in this that is almost unbearable to consider. The thing that hurts them is the thing that saves them. The fire does not distinguish between burning and warming. It simply gives heat, and the human body receives it, gratefully at night, painfully by day, without the luxury of choosing one without the other. This is the contract of the medieval kitchen. You give your body to the fire, your hands, your face, your lungs, your waking hours. And in return, the fire gives you the only thing it has: warmth. Warmth to cook with, warmth to survive by, warmth to sleep in, on a stone floor, in a room that smells of smoke and grease and straw, surrounded by the breathing of 30 people who will rise before dawn and do it all again. It is not a fair exchange, but it is the only one available. The spit boy, the scullions, the head cook with his key around his neck, they are all asleep now. And if you are still awake listening to this, I want you to consider something small. Tomorrow morning, when you walk into your kitchen, with its electric lights and its refrigerator and its water that arrives clean and warm from a tap, take a moment, just a moment, and think about the boy on the hearthstone, the one whose fire never stopped burning, and never stopped hurting, and never stopped keeping him alive. If this story has changed the way you think about something as simple as a kitchen, I would love to hear about it. Leave a comment. Tell me what stayed with you.
The kitchen sleeps. The fire breathes. The castle is still. And outside these walls, beyond the bailey, beyond the village, beyond the fields that stretch to the edge of the forest, the night holds everything in silence. It is time, I think, to let it hold us too. It is nearly midnight. The kitchen has been still for 2 hours now. The breathing of the servants has settled into a single collective rhythm, slow and deep and unconscious, the sound of bodies that have given everything they had and are now, for a few brief hours, reclaiming what little the day has left them. The coup-feu sits over the embers like a patient guardian. Beneath its dome, the fire has not gone out. It has simply withdrawn, pulled itself inward, reduced itself to a faint, pulsing glow, barely visible, barely warm, but alive, still alive, waiting as it waits every night for the hand that will lift the dome and wake it back into usefulness. That hand will come at 2 o'clock in the morning, the baker's hand, calloused, flour-dusted, reaching for the coup-feu in the darkness with the certainty of a man who could find it blindfolded. He will lift the dome. He will blow gently on the embers. He will feed them, first with straw, then with kindling, then with split oak, and the fire will respond the way it always responds, gratefully, hungrily, rising from its banked sleep into the steady, building roar that will heat the ovens and light the room, and begin, once more, the cycle that has no beginning and no end. The bread will be mixed. The dough will rise. The ovens will glow. And by 3 o'clock, the head cook will descend the stairs, lift the couvre-feu from the main hearth, and stand in the growing warmth with that same quiet, assessing look,
reading the fire, reading the room, reading the day ahead. The spit boy will wake, the scullions will wake, the water will be hauled, the cauldron stirred, the animals bled, the spicery unlocked, the horn sounded, the trenchers laid, the fingers of courtesy extended over another meal, another performance, another day, not in hours, but in the turning of the spit and the slow reduction of a sauce. The cycle will begin again, because in a medieval kitchen castle, the cycle always begins again. We have spent a day in this room, a single day, ordinary, unremarkable, identical to the day before it and the day that will follow. And yet within that single day, we have witnessed something that the history books rarely pause to record. We have seen a boy turn a spit until his hands blistered. We have seen a girl scrub pots until her skin cracked. We have seen a man carry the weight of a household's hunger on his shoulders, with nothing but a key around his neck and a memory sharp enough to hold an entire larder in his head. We have seen women summoned from a village to work through the night and return home with bread as payment.
These people do not appear in the chronicles. They are not named in the rolls of honor or the accounts of great battles. No monument marks their labor. No song celebrates the sorcerer's art, or the baker's pre-dawn solitude, or the scullion's ruined hands. But they were here, every day, in every castle, for centuries. And the food arrived at the Lord's table, and the fire never went out. Remember them. Sleep well tonight. You have earned it, though perhaps not as thoroughly as the boy on the hearthstone. I will see you in the next chapter of our cozy corner of history. And if this story stays with you, if you find yourself tomorrow morning standing in your own kitchen and thinking of theirs, I would love to know. What will you remember most? The spices that crossed the world? The fire that never died? Or the people who kept it burning? Tell me. I will be here. Good night.